to In the News for July 14th, 2023. I am Brett Birdie from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Happy Bastille Day, Brett.
I didn't know you celebrated. That's great.
Well,
Jeff.
I am in New Orleans, which is sort of a French town. So, we probably do celebrate it here more than other places.
yeah. It's Ohio is not that big of a holiday.
Not a big holiday in Ohio, yes.
It's good to see you back. I'm glad to be back. We had to miss last week for a good reason, an unfortunate reason.
Unfortunately, after dodging COVID for 3 years, it finally caught up with me last week. So last Thursday and Friday were not pleasant, but I'm now on the other side of it. And I guess technically I'm supposed to wear a mask today and tomorrow, but Brett, you're in Ohio, I'm in New Orleans. I think that's right. We're 6 feet away. So we're just a little more than 6 feet. We're in good shape. So
it's all going to be fine. Well, it's good to see you back and healthy again. I missed you last week, but we got to catch up on some news.
Indeed.
I think 2 weeks ago, we mentioned that Apple released iOS 16.5.1. And if you did upgrade then, good for you, but there's something new. In fact, I don't know if we've seen this maybe a couple of times. You would probably remember. This isn't 16.5.2. It's actually 16.5.1 parentheses A. So it was a rapid response, security response. I know we've talked a little bit about this before too.
Yeah, these are great. This is something that Apple came up with last year, where if they see some security flaw that's actively being exploited in the wild. So like if you go to the wrong website, you could actually theoretically be hacked. They want to do something quickly, and you don't necessarily want to wait for the next iOS update, because sometimes that might be a month or two away. And so with this rapid security response system, they can just very quickly introduce a patch just for this one quick thing and get it out super, super quickly. And they're actually not too bad on the user standpoint, because they're so small that you can usually update your phone in just a minute or two. So they've only done it. There was a test one earlier this year or something like that, and there's only been one, just a handful of them that we've even seen so far. But this one came out. But what was sort of interesting and almost funny about this one is that they released the A update, which is the one that you referred to, and I think it was out for like less than an hour or something like that. And I actually just happened to install it during that hour without thinking about it, because I figured, hey, security update, you might as well be safe. And then Apple pulled it back, because in the process of fixing the flaw, they also made it that the Safari browser couldn't access certain websites like Facebook and stuff like that. And so they had to sort of retool. They rapidly retooled the rapid security response update, and then about a day or two later they introduced the C as opposed to the A version of it. And so that's out now. And so anyway, long story short, it was a quick fix, but I just thought it was funny because it's almost like you were a little bit too rapid, Apple, in getting that fix out there.
It just kind of amazes me now that, I remember the days when even doing a point update, like to 13, or 12.3, that was a pretty big deal. And like you had to set aside, half an hour or so to make sure that your phone could update. And now that we're put to this point, I mean, I didn't even know that these were coming out. My phone does notify me, but you have now, even on the iPhone, like the automatic updates, or you can choose to have automatic updates. And, even sometimes my watch will inform me, well, we're going to try to do this update tonight, as long as it's being charged or whatever. And I guess, we're putting a lot of trust in Apple that we trust these updates to do what they're supposed to do. But it's just kind of good that certainly on the security side, that they are being more rapider, that they're coming down. That's good stuff.
I will mention, Brett, that if you do have your iPhone on the automatic update system, the way that Apple does it is those phones don't update the second or even the minute or even the hour that the updates come out. Those are sort of pre-programmed to wait a certain period of time. I don't know what the period of time is. And the reason for that, it's more of a practical thing. Apple knows that it releases an update, some percentage of users are going to hear about it and upgrade instantly. And then once its servers have died down, then your phone does. So if your phone's on an automatic update system, I see pretty much zero chance that you would have installed that A update. If you're somebody geeky like me, that I just happened to notice it was available because I saw it mentioned at a website. So I'm like, hey, I might as well go patch it real quick while I'm thinking about it. But if my iPhone, I had just waited for it to do it on its own, I would have completely missed that A and would have just eventually been told about the C.
Right. I just noticed in here too, if you go into your updates, into general security, general and updates, and you tap on automatic updates, you can toggle on and off iOS updates and install the iOS updates. You have download and install, and then there is a toggle down there that you can choose to automatically install rapid security responses in
Mhm,
system
mhm.
files. I had that turned on, and I think most of us would probably recommend that you keep that turned on for the reasons that we
Correct.
just discussed. But you know, if it's something that does bother you and you want to wait and do it manually, then you are
Yeah,
welcome
it's
to
nice you
totally
have all
make
those
that change
controls.
there. Not only is it Bastille Day, it is happy birthday to the App Store. 15 years old. This is great. You linked to Phil Schiller from Apple on Mastodon posting about the 15th birthday. And not only that, I think even more interesting to me, you linked to your post, Jeff, from December 6th, 2008, where you're talking about the fact that, what was it? This was 10,000 apps available, I think, or yeah, 10,000 apps available on the App Store in 2008. And then another quick story you linked to, even on TechCrunch from 2008, talking about the top paid and free apps from 2008. Really just kind of a nice walk down memory lane here for me.
Yeah, unless you've been using an iPhone since the very beginning, you may not even know about this. But when the iPhone first came out in 2007, the only apps were the built-in apps. So
Right,
you did have a home screen, but there wasn't really a lot to move around because all you had was what Apple gave you automatically.
Right.
And at the time, Apple's like, well, if you want some third party to do something, they can just make a website. Have a web app,
That's
as
right.
it were.
That's what they said. Right.
And they did that for the first year, but I think everybody probably knew that that was only going to last for so long. And so a year later, in 2008, that's when Apple introduced the iPhone 3, I guess it was, the next iPhone. And then they also came out with the App Store. And when the App Store debuted, they were proud to announce that there were 500 apps available. My goodness, 500 choices. And then, as I said, just a couple months later, they were up to 10,000. Yeah, what you're showing right now is a great ad from, I think that was from the Wall Street Journal, but it was just talking about all the different types of apps that you can get to do all sorts of different tasks. But what I thought was particularly funny was that TechCrunch article, because it linked some of the top apps back in what is this, July of 2008. So this is like literally soon after the App Store had debuted, and some of these apps are long gone, but there are apps on here. There's like MLB.com at BAP. I mean, that's still a very popular thing.
That's right.
OmniFocus. I mean, OmniFocus is out there. Question. Facebook, obviously, still a very big deal. So, and then there's things like, in New York Times, obviously. Then there's things like AOL Radio and MySpace Mobile that we're not really using so much anymore.
Yeah, maybe not so much. Maybe not top 10 anymore. That's great, though. I mean, like I said, it was just fun to kind of walk down. The top paid app in 2008 was Super Monkey Ball.
But it was a top app.
1,800.
That's the funny part. 1,800 downloads. I mean, 1,800 downloads of an app today wouldn't even be a blip. But in the very beginning, that was enough to get you all the way to number one.
I can't help myself, but I got to say, kids these days, they can't imagine an iPhone without multiple apps. I mean, I remember, we were so enamored with the iPhone when it first came out, or maybe I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure I do for many other people, that we just even had the capability of going to a website, or, I remember the Notes app, and everything was that skeuomorphic look to it, that looks so outdated by today's standards. But, we could do all this, and we had email. And I know almost immediately, I remember people started decrying the fact that we can't, have additional apps. We want to do more on the iPhone. But even what we could do was amazing at the time. And then, a year or so later, when Apple did finally have the App Store, and it would just, things just started flooding in. And of course, there's been all kinds of issues and complications since then with the potential of the App Store. But certainly there's no question that it has just made the iPhone experience even so much better today.
And just to highlight that a little bit, Brett, because we almost forget about it. I mean, at the time, the App Store really is a big deal, even though we're so used to it now. 15 years ago, 15 years later. I mean, I remember with my earlier phones, like I used to use a Palm Trio, and before that, used some BlackBerry. There either were no third-party apps, or with the Palm Trio, for example, if I wanted to get like, a game, for example, Bejeweled, which you have behind you on your screen, I would have to go into a store and buy a box called Bejeweled, probably for $30 at least, right? And then I would, get that disc, and I would put it in my computer, and I would transfer it over to my Palm, and it was complicated and a pain and everything else. Whereas the idea that you have a store right there on the device, and that within a second you could just tap and instantly get an app. I mean, that sort of instant gratification. And of course, Apple, for better or for worse, when Apple introduced the App Store, they really did a lot to keep the prices really low by having, encouraging apps to be just a few dollars and stuff. And I know that for some people that made the business models more difficult, but the flip side is the companies no longer needed to make that box and to have the distribution of putting it around the country. So they definitely saved some money. And in the long term, it led to the point that for the most part, apps were inexpensive enough. And there's obviously some exceptions, but they were usually inexpensive enough that, I don't mind spending a few bucks to try out an app. And if I like it, great. If I don't, I haven't lost that much. I mean, that has just completely changed the landscape of computers. I mean, because even computers didn't work the same way. You have to get these boxes. So the App Store really was a fundamental change. And I do think that Apple deserves credit for coming up with something that was so innovative and just, made it so easy, like you said, Brett, to expand the capabilities of these devices that we have in our hands.
Some apps got better over the years and some software didn't. This was an interesting story that you linked to from our friend David Sparks about Evernote. And I know so many people, Jeff, and you do too, over the years that we used Evernote as sort of just that catch-all for just, I mean, they called it Evernote. And if people that know that the logo for Evernote was an elephant, right? Because it was like capture your brain, like just dump your brain, put everything into Evernote that you need. And I still have an Evernote account. And now after reading this, I think to myself, maybe I should make sure I export out some of that. Although as our friend David Sparks, I don't think I've ever heard anybody describe software as a Roach Motel, but David does, and for good reason. This was a story he wrote about Evernote and getting too big for your britches that, it looks like the days might be numbered for Evernote now.
When Evernote came out over a decade ago, it was really groundbreaking because it was one of the first app/platforms, whatever you want to call it, that encouraged the idea of you don't have to remember all these things. Whatever little bits and pieces that you have, little, snippets of information or some text, just stick it in Evernote. And that way, whether you're on your computer or whether you're on your phone or wherever you are, you can just get it. And it was, first of all, it was sort of a pioneer in putting things in the cloud, because nowadays we take that for granted, but that was a bigger deal more than 10 years ago. Gosh, we're going through memory lane today, Brett. But then additionally, it was important because of all the uses of my iPhone, I really think that one of the biggest ones for me, I mean, it's great that it can tell me the weather. It's great that it can give me directions, but I always think of it as sort of my extra brain because of the elephant analogy that you described. All of these details in my life that I don't want to waste my brain power trying to remember them. I can just put them in my iPhone, maybe somewhere secure, like the 1Password app, if it's really confidential, or maybe just my Notes app, if it's something more, not, but the idea, like just putting something in my iPhone so that whenever I need that information, it's there, but I don't have to worry about trying to memorize it. That is revolutionary. But Evernote was really one of the pioneers of that mindset. And so the company deserves a ton of credit for, for all of that way back when. Now, over time, the company, got, all sorts of pressures and eventually sold out. And it's no longer what it is now. In fact, the guy that was one of the two founders of Evernote, Phil Lisbon, I think his name is, he actually went on to start, what is his name? Phil Libin, Libin.
Yes, Libin,
he actually, I mean, he's been involved in a number of companies over the years, but the current one that he's involved in is called which is like MMHMM. And they are one of the pioneers in teleconferencing stuff, like what their software does. And I've used it before, where you run and then on top of Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever your video conferencing software is, and it allows you to do all sorts of cool things, like have a document appear right next to you, have slides come up next to you, have animated things in the background. Now, more and more, those features are being built into Zoom and Teams and stuff so that you don't necessarily need the product as well. But again, once again, he was on the forefront of something that was really cutting edge, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. So, so good on Phil for being involved in some of these groundbreaking products. But Evernote, even though it's no longer what it once was, you got to toast it for what it was way back when, because I think it made a difference. It moved the industry forward.
I'm so glad you highlighted that, because that's exactly what I do today. And typically the first place I will go to is my Notes app on my phone. And I even notice my kids do the same thing. If my daughter's trying to remember something, a list to take to camp of things, I mean, immediately she just pulls it out and she just starts typing a note. And to your point again, the whole idea about iCloud being able to synchronize in the cloud, or the Notes app being able to synchronize through iCloud. So I know that I can see that immediately on my Mac and on my iPad, or I can even log into iCloud.com on a computer somewhere and find those notes. And you're absolutely right that Evernote was sort of the pioneer in that aspect. I do just want to go back since I brought it up. David talked about the Roach Motel. One of the biggest complaints that I know a lot of power users had with Evernote was the fact that you could not easily, at least initially, like export out your
Correct.
notes in a generic general reading format, if you will, like a text format. It was like a proprietary file format, if I can remember it correctly, Jeff, something like that. And, people, especially David, our friend, hated that, right? I want to be able to take my information. It's my information, and I want to put it in different places like that. It's gotten better. I remember there was even some third-party app, utilities that could do
That's
Evernote,
right.
To OneNote, that kind of a thing. So you can get your notes out that in that aspect. But anyway, I hate to see it. The story that David is talking about here is that it was sold to an Italian company, and it sounds like that they're laying off some people, which is never a good thing as well. But another quick story just that I thought was great. I just started reading this. This was from this is a 2013 Time magazine story about Evernote
Right.
from Harry McCracken. Okay, there it is. I got it correctly this time. And it just is nice, to be able to read through that. Like you said, we've been going down memory lane. So why don't we be done with memory lane? Let's look to the future.
Indeed.
we talked about iOS 16.5, and we have alluded to iOS 17, mostly because Apple had the Worldwide Developers Conference a month or so ago, and they announced iOS 17. Well, finally now, it looks like this past week, right? I think, Jeff, that the public beta has now been released, and so that means we have lots of people talking about the updates. And I got to tell you, I don't know if I've ever installed a beta, maybe many years ago, but you and I are typically, because we use these devices a lot, we don't usually get to the beta. But I got to tell you, everything you linked to today, Jeff, I'm really tempted to jump in to iOS 17 and iPadOS 17 in the public betas.
Yeah, I tell you, it's the developer beta came out immediately last month at WWDC, but as of this week, you don't have to be an app developer. Just anyone can sign up for the public beta and install it. Like you, Brett, I have done the public beta once or twice over the past decade. And the problem is that even though, like right now, for example, everything I'm hearing is that it's mostly stable, but there are still things here and there that it doesn't work. And you never know, as through the update cycle, when tomorrow's next update to the beta comes up, things may break. And although I'm really tempted to try out the brand new features, because gosh, I love new features, but I also use my iPhone and my iPad to get work done, and I don't have an extra iPhone. And even if I had an extra iPhone, that wouldn't even count, because unless I was using the new system on the thing that I get on my, do every day, I wouldn't be really experiencing it. So what I typically do is enjoy reading about the updates in articles like these and just get ready for it. But I wait until the day that the official version is released, because then I know that I have the security that I can use it without it necessarily crashing my device. But it's fun to read these articles, and so many new things are coming out.
The standby feature, a couple of the stories you linked to, the standby feature, which maybe you can describe it better, but it basically is almost like, if you put your phone in the charging mode, it now will show some information on the screen, and you can customize that even with widgets a little bit. That alone, I'm like, I want that.
Yeah, standby is going to be especially nice for the iPhones that have the always on screens, like my current 14. iPhone 14 Pro, because that way I can just have a stand at my desk. I can have a stand next to my bed, and I just put my iPhone in the landscape orientation so that it's long ways, and you can put whatever you want on there, including this widget view where you can decide which two widgets are next to each other. So like maybe a big clock, and maybe like your upcoming calendar or the weather or whatever you want, or, to-do items. And it looks really nice. In fact, as I'm reading about it, I'm starting to get ready for it, because the stand that I currently have on my bedstand, it actually holds my iPhone. It charges it, but it holds it in portrait orientation, up and down.
We're in the same mindset, Jeff.
Literally just yesterday, I was reaching out to the company Studio Neat that makes the stand that I currently have, because they have a newer version that has it incorporates the Apple MagSafe charger, which is that sort of puck clicking circle. And so because of that, you can actually turn it either up and down, or you can turn it landscape mode. And I just sent the company an email yesterday. I'm like, let me just double check. Is it going to work with standby mode? And they're like, absolutely, because I'm sure that they're excited about the fact that a product that they already have on the market is ready for iOS 17. So I may get that one. I haven't decided which one I'm going to use yet, but that's just the one at home. I mean, at my home, I want to have something that I can charge my iPhone and my watch and maybe even my AirPods. So I'm looking at their Trio charger. But here in my office at my desk, I think I want just like a simple stand that just holds the iPhone. It doesn't necessarily have to hold anything else. But when I'm not using my phone at my desk, I would love to have my iPhone just sitting there, displaying whatever it's going to display, even if it's something as simple as the time, just so that I can use it for glanceable information. What's my next appointment? That would probably be really important in the office. Or maybe I put email. I don't even know what I'll use it for, but I love the idea of having just a quick glanceable screen. So standby mode seems like a great use for people that have an iPhone with an always on screen. If you don't have an always on screen, I think it loses some of the usefulness because you have to tap it. But over time, I mean, the new iPhones that come out this fall, they'll have that feature. We're a year or two away from a large number of iPhone users having phones with always on screens.
One of the stories you linked to was from Federico Vitici at Mac Stories. And I thought this one image right here is exactly what I was thinking, Jeff. You and I are on the same wavelength. Is like, I'm going to be shopping. Darn it. I'm going to have to buy another stand for my iPhone because I don't want to lay it down like on a table. I want it to be now standing up, just like Federico's got in the picture here, next to exactly what you're talking about, next to my computer. So I want it to be upright and I want it to be horizontal so that I have that screen that I can just glance down there to see the next appointment, you know, or a phone call coming in, whatever the case may be. And of course, another story you linked to was from Dan Moren, which I thought did a really good job of how he went in and talking about how you can do even widgets. And it sounds like you can flick up and down to change the widgets on the standby screen, which I'm just continue to get excited about that. That's just really cool stuff on there.
So standby is a cool new feature. Go ahead.
Yeah. What was the other one? Oh, another one here. Live voicemail for the phone call averse. This story in The Verge. This is by Allison Johnson, which I just thought was a great story. She's fairly witty in here, and she's like, you know, I'm never going to answer a phone call again. And I liked it here because now we talked about this. Live voicemail means that somebody can call in, and you know, a lot of times I'll just let it go to voicemail, which means that I got to remember to pick it up again at some point in the near future to listen to the voicemail, but no longer. Because the live voicemail, theoretically, we'll see how good this works. Theoretically, it will transcribe the voicemail on the screen while I'm looking at the screen. And I liked how Allison said here that you can silently marvel as one robot tells another robot how you could be saving 50% on your cable bill. So in other words, I don't have to answer the phone. I just let it go to voicemail, but I can read it and then I can immediately delete it if I need to.
And more importantly, if it is something important, you know, somebody saying, hey, you know, your car's on fire or something like that, you know, then you can immediately pick it up. It's a way of screening calls. And, you know, I laugh because the idea of screening phone messages is something that people have been doing since the 1980s when we first had, you know, those
tape recorder,
the little tape recorder things. Exactly. To record your messages when people called your telephone. So, you know, everything old is new again. And once again, we'll have this technology. But, you know, I have resisted so far turning on the feature that only people in my contacts will make the phone ring, because if you want it to be protective and you're just sick and tired of the spam telemarketers and stuff like that, you could say, you know, only have my phone ring if it's somebody that I know that's in my contacts. But I get nervous about that, Brett, because sometimes like a court might call me as an attorney, or, you know, if I'm traveling a hotel or someone I don't know. I mean, enough people have my number that aren't necessarily in my contacts that I don't necessarily want to miss those phone calls. But in iOS 17, where it's so much easier to screen those calls and pick them up if it's something important, I don't know. I might actually turn that feature on, and therefore, you know, cut down. I mean, I don't get a ton of those telemarketer spam calls, but I do get them, you know, every week probably, and they're always annoying. So I don't know. It's something I'm going to think about.
I know. And I thought, you know, this was a good story that you linked to from Dan Moore, and he was going through the exact same thing. He's never turned that off, you know, because he says there's always phone calls that he gets. But now with this capability, he is considering turning that on so that only, you know, phone calls will come through. Anyway, that's just going to be interesting to see how that lands on that. I just thought some other, I mean, the story, the headline from The Verge, and I think you alluded to this as well, is like, there's just a ton of little tiny, really neat welcome updates in there that make a big impact overall. And this is another great review from Federico. Of course, he just goes into so much detail. One of the last one quickly that involves the Apple TV and tvOS 17 and the iPhone was, I know we just alluded to this quickly, but you can actually use your phone and an Apple TV together to have phone calls over FaceTime, which I thought the story Felipe here in 9 to 5 Mac did a good job of at least saying it's very cool, but it's a little awkward because, your phone has to be like facing you, but it's just really neat. I mean, it's something he even says he underestimated how cool it was, even though you got to get used to it a little bit.
Yeah, you want to have something to sort of prop up your iPhone in the right way, and it's the back of the iPhone that's looking towards you,
right?
Which is good because that means it's your best phone. It's that best camera that's on the back of the iPhone. But you have a little stand and or whatever you use, or lean it up against something, put it right underneath your TV screen, and then use your Apple TV and have FaceTime calls. I mean, I say this, I've said this before, but during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, when that was the way that we would communicate with family members, was have these Zoom calls and stuff, and I had these janky solutions where we would try to put my iPad and connect it to the Apple TV, and it never really works very well. But something like this that's really, like with screen mirroring, exactly. But something like this that's really made for this solution, I just think it's great. And with the Apple TV, sort of by definition being the television that you have in like your living room or your TV room or whatever, it just sort of seems like for family, getting together with family when it's somebody's birthday and you're not going to travel across the country to see them, it just seems like a perfect solution for something like that. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I realize that there's going to be, some time before multiple people, you got to have everybody in your family sort of using it. But for some families and for some situations, that's going to be just a completely transformative thing. It's going to be great.
Not only is iOS 17 coming for the iPhone and the iPad, and I'm excited about that, but I think I'm even more excited about watchOS 10 coming out. And if there was one thing that was really tempting me to upgrade, this would probably be it. But to your point, Jeff, if you're going to do that public upgrade and I want to see iOS 17 on my iPhone and my iPad and my watch, then I have to upgrade all of them, right, to that public beta in order to take advantage of that. But the watchOS 10 features, to me, are probably the thing I'm most excited about. It's going to be a little bit different because the buttons are going to be changed in how they act. But just the fact that I can get access to a little more functionality on my watch face with even the widgets, I am ready for that.
Yeah, let me tell you two things that are really getting me excited. One of them is the new uses of, you mentioned the buttons, but I'm going to focus specifically on the digital crown, the little thing that you sort of spin on the side of your Apple Watch. I don't use my digital crown a lot with my Apple Watch. Every once in a while, I'll have a function for it, but most of the time when I interact with my Apple Watch, I'm just touching the screen or I'm sliding the screen. And I think that Apple realized that. And Apple realized that, the digital crown is pretty cool, but it's not currently being taken advantage of to its full, potential. And so I think that is the thinking behind the new widgets and stuff like that. Now, the new design of the Apple Watch is that you're going to be having a lot more information that you scroll up and down using that digital crown. And so something that people use occasionally, I think is going to be an even more important button, user interface. And the idea that on any watch screen, you can just scroll up with the crown and see all these little widgets of snippets of information that you want, that you need at a time. That's great. And so I love the idea that Apple is rethinking, let's make the best use of our buttons. Now, it does mean that some things that, if you have, just the brain memory of, this button always does this thing, you're going to have to relearn that. And that's sort of a shame. But we've been through this before. Apple has changed what buttons do in the past. And so I think it's fine that they're going to change it again. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to. And I also hear that so many of the built-in apps and the watch face and stuff really take full advantage of the bigger screens. The screens have increased over time. And of course, Brett, goodness, you've got the really big screen with the Apple Watch Ultra that you wear.
Can't go back.
And so taking advantage of all four corners of the screen, making the most of it. It looks like the new Apple Watch update is going to do that. So there's many other new features too, but those two alone, for me, that's going to make it a more enjoyable experience. And you add on top of that things like the Snoopy watch face, which I laugh that so many reviews are like, I don't want to waste time talking about Snoopy, but it's a really cool watch face. It's so awesome. That's is it going to be something that you use all the time? No, but it'll be fun to play with when it comes out.
To your point quickly on the digital crown, I remember the first Apple Watch that I had, you remember this, Jeff, the digital crown did do something on the actual watch face. I used this one time and I thought, why would I ever care about that? Did they call it time machine, or
They
no,
may have called it
that's
time
the
machine, yeah.
it was like
But or
time shifting or something like
time
that.
travel or something, but you would
Yeah.
turn that and it would sort of go back in time so that you could see, you know, what was the temperature 3 hours ago. And I'm
Right,
like, okay, I guess that's an interesting
cool party
use.
trick. Yeah.
Right. And it was really just a party trick. It's taken Apple a while to figure out what's the best use of the hardware, which is funny because like the hardware from day one of
Yeah,
having a
that's
digital crown at the top right and a button on the bottom right, they haven't changed that very much. But over the years, they've said, you know, it's a good idea to have these buttons, but how could we do something even better with them?
Yeah.
And so now here we go with the next iteration. Hopefully this will be the best one yet.
I know.
I really think it will be though.
And I think even Dan says this in here. I mean, he thinks, and I've heard this from other folks, that this is maybe one of the best like hardware interactive designs that Apple has come up with. And even to underscore that part, we see this also in the Apple Vision Pro, right? They're using something very similar in the Apple Vision Pro.
Right.
But it's just like after that was stopped, because I forget what iOS, I think Dan mentions it in here, that they stopped doing that time shift or everything because I don't think anybody was using it. I can only think of two things that I use the digital crown for right now, Jeff, and that is if I'm in like my Spotify app or my Apple Music app, I'll use the crown to turn the volume up and down. But I gotta tell you, yeah, it takes a while. It takes like a second or two for it to actually respond because it doesn't know if you're doing that or scrolling through anyway. But that's one use. The other use is I usually put my apps on my watch in a list as opposed to that big cloud, you know?
Me too.
And so if I scroll up and down, I can just flick my finger up and down, but then I use the digital crown sometimes to scroll faster. All that just to say, that's it. It's like, it's such a beautiful little piece of interactive hardware. And all we use it for are these simple little silly things. And yeah, I welcome the fact that that Apple is going to change that. And there's another great story here from Alex on Mac Stories that you linked to as well that was just going through a lot of the same thing. But I actually liked here in Alex, just quickly, thank you for showing like what it looks like now, like the Siri watch face, and then what it's going to look like with a quote smart stack, which I love a smart stack widget on my iPhone right now, Jeff. The fact that I can have a smart stack of widgets or, you know, additional information on my watch, bring it on. I'm ready. I might be upgraded to the public beta before next week. I don't know, Jeff. We'll have to see.
Yeah, this is one of the best things about Apple lately, Brett, is that, you know, whether it's the Apple Watch or the iPhone or the iPad or the Mac, you know, Apple will come up with something new on one of those platforms. And then over time, they'll find ways to take the same idea and implement it on another platform, which is just fabulous. I love all that cross-pollination and, you know, really taking advantage of great ideas and making new uses of them.
Here's a bonus tip for today. I like this. I think I had seen this before, but it's great. The volume trick on your iPhone that you never knew you could do. So typically, just quickly, when I'm raising or lowering the volume on my iPhone, like if I'm listening to music or so, I'll just use the volume buttons on the side of the phone. And I usually will look and see on my screen, there's a little slider that comes up and it tells me how loud and how soft that my volume is. But I don't know if I remember that as you click the volume button, you see the slider, you can actually use your finger to interact with that slider. Thank you, my friend, for linking to this story today.
And it's a neat trick because when you use your finger, like so, press your volume button to start changing the volume. And then when you see the indicator show up on the screen, put your finger on it, you can be a lot more precise and a lot faster in moving it way up and way down than you can by press the buttons on the side. And so, you know, it requires using a second finger or a second hand, as it were, to jump over there and do it. Although I guess maybe you could do it one-handed if you're a little bit more, if you're a little more clever than I am. But you do have a lot more control by doing it that way. So it's just one of those things that it's been right there in front of me the whole time. Neat. And yet it never occurred to me to try it.
Neat tip. Well, 2 weeks in the technology world, Jeff, goes a long way. And I don't think we can go forward on a technology focused podcast without mentioning the newest technology trend today, which is the Threads app. So this was Facebook's launch of basically a Twitter rival, and there was multiple stories that we could link to, but I think you did the best job of linking to John Gruber at Daring Fireball today with his bullet point list of thoughts. It sounds like you're on it. I went ahead and jumped on it because it links to your Instagram/Facebook account, which I thought was fairly clever, but I've seen some people not so happy about that as well. But you know, we'll see where that goes, right? Twitter just continues to look like they become the Roach Motel, or they look like they're just becoming a little bit of a wasteland. We've talked about Mastodon here on here before, and I think that that's still thriving. But boy, I got to tell you, I've seen a lot of people that I know, and probably you too, Jeff, have gotten on Threads, probably because it is so easy just to use your Instagram account to join Threads.
Yeah, Twitter was having problems in being mismanaged for a while, and then they sold to Elon Musk, and I was hoping maybe that would make things better, and of course, it's only made things worse.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people say, I like the idea of just scrolling through text message type things from people that I'm interested in following, but I want an alternative to Twitter. And so people like me, I've been trying out Mastodon, and that's sort of nice. Yeah. And then there are other things out there like Blue Sky, which is still a closed beta. But this, I was amazed how quickly Threads took the world by storm. Suddenly, tens of millions of people are signed up for the service. And again, I guess there's no surprise because Instagram is so popular, and Meta made it so easy just to take your Instagram account and move it right on over to Threads with all of your followers and who you're following and stuff. And so the on-ramp was very easy. But even so, I have to admit, I was a little surprised that it got so many users so quickly. And they're even saying that in the future, they're promising that Threads is going to be interoperable with Mastodon and stuff like that, which makes me wonder if one of the things that I like about Mastodon is I really like using the Ivory app, which comes from the people that used to make Tweetbot for Twitter. And so I love using Ivory with Mastodon. If Threads becomes compatible with Mastodon, does that mean that I can use the Ivory app with Threads? That would be great. I mean, that would, maybe if that sort of happened, so that instead of years ago when I was using Tweetbot to use Twitter, maybe in the future I'd be using something very similar to Tweetbot, Ivory, and something very similar to Twitter, Threads. Maybe that'll be the big new thing for the future. So it's a lot of potential. And again, obviously there's a lot of interest, and so many people have signed up for it so quickly. We'll see how much it works. One other thing I'll mention is that although I enjoy using Mastodon for a lot of the reasons that I enjoyed using Twitter, the Mastodon, for me at least, it's like a lot of the techie people that I follow are on Mastodon. But when it comes to things like, news sites, like my local newspaper or more general interest sites, I find them harder to find on Mastodon. Whereas Threads, because of its mainstream appeal, it's getting all sorts of companies and news and stuff like that in it. And so maybe it will be able to scratch that itch for me that Twitter used to and nowadays is no longer scratching. So I of course it's being run by Facebook, and people can say good, bad, or otherwise about Facebook, much like you can say good, bad, or otherwise about Elon Musk and Twitter and everything else.
I know.
But again, if you're comfortable enough with that to use Facebook and to use Instagram, here's another choice that, at least for now, looks like it's got some real potential.
I kind of feel like you got to dance with the devil that right? I mean, even John Gruber in here says like Mastodon is inherently too confusing for mass market adoption. The things that you and I probably like about Mastodon is the sense that there is no one company that oversees it. Probably for the mass market, for the masses of folks in our precious family and friends that are not nearly as nerdy and geeky as we are, they're not going to go try to find a Mastodon server. I mean, it's even very easy, but that's the whole thing. They probably already have an Instagram account, just like you said. And so it's very easy for them to get onto the thread. So, but anyway, I'm glad we just talked about it. I thought this was a great post from Gruber, and we'll be watching that. And I think iPhone JD you already have an account, correct?
Indeed.
So there. All right. Where you at segment. This is good. Another week, another AirTag helping to put a doomed burglar behind bars. This is from imore.com. I think this was overseas, right? In the United Kingdom, if I'm not
in the United Kingdom. Yeah, such a story that, I mean, some woman said that somebody, I don't know I guess you would call it breaking into her house. Apparently one of her back doors was unlocked. And so the guy just sort of walks in the back of her house and grabs her purse and walks out. I'm like, goodness gracious, nobody wants that to happen. But because her purse had her keys in it and the keys had an AirTag on them, it was very easy to follow it to a hotel, and the police were able to sure enough and capture the guy and arrest him. So things that can easily be stolen, it just makes so much sense to put an AirTag in there. I mean, you can get one for $20-$25, attach it to your keys or just stick it inside of the thing. But we all know the things that a thief is likely to want to grab a purse or a briefcase being a perfect
Right.
example. There's
Right.
really no reason not to just, stick an AirTag in there to protect yourself.
I did it. I mean, and by the way, I think it's over now, but Amazon had their Prime days, and typically Amazon will sell the 4-pack of AirTags for what, less than $90, maybe 80, something like that, which is a fantastic deal. One of the times that happened a couple of months ago, I got mine, and sure enough, I've got all 4 of them. I got one in my wife's purse. I've got one in my roller bags, and you try to hide it. You want to make sure it's not so obvious. If you can, put it somewhere. But yeah, and in fact, especially with over the last, several couple of holidays, I've just seen travel blogs talk about this ad nauseum almost. It's like the best travel accessory you can have with you now. And it worked for you too. I remember when you went overseas, Jeff, it's like, and for me, I remember I landed somewhere, I think it was New York maybe. And we were all waiting for my bag. And I'm like, okay, well, how long are we gonna have to wait? It had to come from the plane. And I was tracking it coming down the terminal.
Yep.
And I'm like, I know when they're going to be here, so I know when to crowd, the little conveyor belt. Anyway, just in this story quickly, I thought it was funny. Apparently, the woman initially went and confronted the burglar and told the burglar, "You've got my keys." And he fumbled around, he found the keys, gave them back to her. But then obviously the police were able to follow up on it. But don't do that, right?
Don't
we
do
typically
that.
say,
don't
try to be the vigilante and go after it yourself. But in this case, at least the story worked out. Good. Well, speaking of being able to track things, here is a great article that I have to admit, I didn't have the 4 days yet to read through it, Jeff, but I cannot wait. This might be my weekend reading here. This was a great article that you linked to. It's about a year and a half old, about how GPS, global positioning system, works. And I do want to know about this. Thank you for the link.
Yeah, I wish I could pronounce the person's name who wrote it, but it's Bartosz Chanowski. Oh goodness, I know I've butchered that, and I apologize. But there is a link to it on iPhone JD today, and it's a really nice article on the way GPS works. It's nice because obviously the author understands this, but starts by explaining the most basic parts of it. Very simple terms, and over the course of the article, it gets more and more complicated, but only through building blocks, so that as you follow along the article, you understand it. But the words are only half the story. What's really interesting is when I started reading the story, I saw some note at the end that said you can disable animations if you want to preserve battery power. I'm like, what? And sure enough, I read this article on my iPad, and over the course of me reading it for 20, 30 minutes, it dramatically drained the battery on my iPad, because this page has got hundreds and hundreds of animations.
There's a lot on here. I love it.
If you have them all run, and that's fine. I mean, I made it to the end of the article without my iPad, draining or something like that. But it really did make a noticeable difference. But over time, you can play with them. There's little sliders and stuff. But that's nice is it helps you to understand it. So as the article describes, here's how GPS works. Let's start with the basic concepts and then get more sophisticated. You can actually sort of play around with things and move some sliders and say, okay, now I see how this affects that. So, we've always known that GPS works with the satellites in the sky, but if you want to have like a more sophisticated understanding of here is actually how it works and here is why it works so well, this is a great article for it. But whether you understand how GPS works or not, it's always interesting to sort of step back and marvel at what an incredible technology. I mean, the idea that things like your Apple Watch or your iPhone know where they are in the world at all times, and all the different things that you can do because of that, whether it be maps or weather or whatever. It's true. What an age we live in today. It really is amazing.
It looks like the first half of the article, like you said, is just using like simple building blocks, and then the second half goes in, and I mean, there's like pictures of exactly how the satellites, revolve around the Earth. And I don't know.
Yeah, because it's not as simple as a circle. Like I would have assumed it's a big circle. That's not. Things have to go in an elliptical. He explains why. The way that satellites work, it actually has to work like this, and all these different things. I just never thought about this before. But I think
I'm going to sit my kids down. Like this is almost
it's
full,
educational,
like college level course in GPS. Okay, well, anyway, we'll include the link in the show notes for sure, and thanks for linking to that. In the know. Here, my favorite tips, Jeff, are the ones that, frankly, I just hit upon by accident, and it's just, I'm like, my jaw drops, and I'm like, I didn't know you could do that. Here's the story. I was reading an article in a web browser, and as I'm normally prone to do, I wanted to share the article with my wife. So typically what I do is in the article, there's a little share box, right? The little box with an arrow pointing straight out. And I tap on the share box. And I do this with you too. If I want to share a story with you or send it to you, and I simply just will text, send it as a text message. And what's always nice about iMessages is that it'll put a text message with just a little tiny, almost like a little blurb or an icon, a screenshot of the story. And that's great. I love doing that. And typically sometimes, especially with my wife, I'm like, hey, check out this story. But, in the third paragraph, this quote is really great. Something like that, right? And so that means I have to explain a whole lot about what's going on, about where to go and read something on the page. Well, the other day, I wanted to share this story with my wife, and it just so happened that I had highlighted the text in the browser, right? Because I can't remember, I was either going to copy it and then paste it somewhere, but I just had the text highlighted, and as the text was highlighted, I then hit the share button, and I tapped on the text message to my wife. And instead of just the link there, it had the link to the story, and it had the text as a quote that I had highlighted. Incredible. I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. I get it. Okay. I'm a very simple guy, and this just made me so happy. But, so often I want to show my wife either one sentence, or I want to share with you to say, here's a quote that I thought was really best. Here's the best quote. And now I know that I can just highlight the text. I hit the share button and I send a text message. I tried doing this. I don't think it works the same way with sharing it via email. I couldn't get it to work even if I shared it. I think I was trying to do something if I wanted to share it to a different app. But in text messages, in iMessages is really where this works, is that you just simply are in a browser, for example, or even I guess in a document or so. If you highlight the text and then hit the share button, it will pull out that quote of the text that you have highlighted. And I love that. I don't think I've ever seen that either mentioned anywhere by anybody, even all of the iPhone hacks, nor have I seen it mentioned by Apple. The only place that I saw anybody mention this was on a Reddit thread from a couple of years ago, which I just hey, I found something that's really cool.
That's a nice little feature and very useful. When I saw that you're going to talk about this, it reminded me of a related feature, which I find annoying. And so I wanted to talk about how to turn it off.
Oh, good.
This is something that came out last fall with iOS 16, that when you share, I'm not talking about in messages. In messages, this little automatic preview that you're discussing, you can't disable that. It is what it is. And it's usually nice because it makes it a little bit easier to see what you're going to see if you click on a link. And in messages, I tend to be sharing text messages with people that I know and trust, like you or my wife, stuff like that. But when it comes to emails, we are always teaching people nowadays appropriately that you need to be careful about links in emails, because we all know that there are bad guys out there that send phishing emails with the PH in the beginning of it, where they want to trick you into clicking a link. And sometimes they will do it by making the link look like it's for example, your bank website, but they'll change around some of the letters, or they'll swab them so that your eye doesn't necessarily see it unless you're paying close attention. So with that in mind, there's a feature that came out last fall that if you take a URL, a web address, and if you paste it into an email using the Mail app on the iPhone or the iPad, it will automatically convert that to a little preview of what the site looks like.
Rich preview, right.
Rich preview, which makes it look nice. I mean, it's prettier, and so that's an advantage of it. But I'm always worried that the person on the other side might say, I don't know exactly what I'm clicking if I click on this. And so they may say, I'd actually prefer to actually know what I'm clicking. And so if you don't want to send that preview to somebody, you just want it to be very clear what the link is, you can convert it back to the old way of the link. And the way that you do it is, once you paste in your mail message, then tap on the little preview that it creates in your mail message. Just tap once, and at the very top right, it will create a little arrow that shows up there. And if you then tap on that arrow, you will see that there's an option that is called convert to plain link. And when you do that in your mail, again, this is not the Messages app, in the Mail app, it will then change that preview back to the http:// and all the address stuff like that. And that way, when you send somebody something, you're just sending them a plain old link, which they can decide if they want to click on it or not click on it. So, sometimes it actually is nice to send it with the link preview because it looks pretty. Sometimes you want to just have a plain link, but now you have a choice. And if you did not know, because you're not going to see that arrow show up unless you click in the middle of it and then look for that right arrow. If you don't know to look for it, you won't know how to change it back. But now with this tip, this is how you convert it back to a plain link, plain text link. And I have to admit, for me, Brett, ever since this feature came out last year, I more often convert it back to a plain URL than leave it. I mean, that tends to be the way that I'm more frequently wanting to share something as a plain URL. So I convert it back to plain text more often than I don't, but that's just me.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that works. I think of one of our friends that we know, John Simic. He is constantly railing. You know, he's a security expert, cybersecurity expert, and he even says if somebody sends you like a Bitly link, right, or a URL shortened, that's
link, always dangerous because you don't know what you're clicking. Yeah.
Exactly. He's like, I will never click on one of those. And then, much the same way, I'm glad that you mentioned this because it is good. You know, if I'm sending something to my wife or if I see a link from you, I'm usually going to trust it, especially with an iMessages. But if it's somebody, if it's somebody else that I don't know, or if I'm trying to send it to maybe a client or somebody, you're absolutely right. This is a good way to just make sure that, hey, you can trust this. And if you don't want to trust it, you can at least see exactly where it's going to go. And you're right. In some cases, that's the only way you're going to be able to tell if it's a phishing link or not, because sometimes they just use some weird kind of shortened URLs. And there are times when I'm like, I don't know if I trust that. And then in that case, if I want to go to my bank account, I'll just separately, outside of that,
always a good idea. Always
I go into a browser or go to my computer and I will go to it individually and link, or maybe even make a phone call. So that's an excellent little secure tip on there as well. Woo, okay, a lot of stuff, but we had some things to catch up on, which is good. Great to see you again, Jeff, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.